Computer. Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to Crapper once again with the old team. Peter Turner,
All
uh,
right, Governor.
Sean, Sean Hall, and myself, Nicholas Parsons. No, sorry, Tim Appleton.
Around the world.
And today we're going to do something a bit different, as is well known to viewers of this channel. We normally do a deep dive on the albums, classic rock and prog albums. But today we're going to try something which I would say has never been tried before, but that's a lie. Because there's loads of these on YouTube, but I don't think anyone will have done it at such tedious length as us. So that's the aim. We're going to do a ranking video. So we should be sitting here ranking for the next however long for your pleasure. Now the band that we're going to rank are well, we're going right back to the beginning, to where it all started for us 3 months ago, whatever it was. And we're going to be looking at Genesis. So we're going to be ranking. Well, Peter, would you like to just explain it's studio albums, right?
Yeah. So what we decided to do was take all the Genesis albums, studio albums only, and there's 15 of them, and rank them from the ones we dislike through to the one that we like the most. Now, I thought it would be interesting if we had a kind of scoring system, because I think otherwise, at the end of this session, none of us are actually going to know anything, because number ones are likely to be different number two. So what we're going to do is this. For the 15th one, you get 15 points. For your 14th one, you get 14 points. And then we'll add up the scores for the albums. So, for example, from Genesis to Revelation, when that gets 45, as a mathematical joke there. And then we will go through them. And at the end, the album with the lowest score will be the winning album, you see.
I see. And you're going to do some quick calculations there at the end, I guess. I like the way you say. I like the way you say. Unless we do that, we won't know anything at the end of this. As if we ever know anything at the end of this.
Yeah, true.
All right, good. Well, thanks for that. So feel free to open your spreadsheet,
Yeah.
Peter, and let's begin. With all that said, let's begin. So we'll start with number 15. Would you like me to start this off? I'm happy to start if you want.
Yeah.
Now, I think that well, before I begin, I was thinking that there's like we've got this list of numbers, right, 1 to 15, and actually that's not the whole story, is it? That's just one way of counting these albums. There's actually different ways of counting them, and which all sort of apply simultaneously, which complicates things. But like when I've seen other ranking videos, often I think, oh, they've reached a point here where below this, I'm actually not really interested in this band at all. Sometimes it sort of splits into two. Where above the line you think, oh, there's about 5 albums that are great. Below the line is 5 albums that you would just never play because you're just not interested in them. And if they weren't the top 5, then you wouldn't even be listening to this band at all because you're basically not interested in the other ones. But anyway, I don't know how much people know about the English Football League. Because it's quite it's not fully international, is it? But what we have like I was thinking one way you could think about this list was in terms of like the Premier League, and then you've got the sort of Championship League, and then what have we got, like League One, League Two? I mean, these used to be like 1, 2, 3, and 4, didn't they? Division 1, 2, 3, and 4. But now, out of because of political correctness, now it's they've all got like just weird names. So we've got Premier League, Championship League, and then League One, League Two. Anyway, so then I was thinking, like, so you could have like 4, and then maybe you could have like a fifth, like a League Three, which is like at risk of dropping out of the competition altogether. So that's where I'm starting. Number 15 is from Genesis to Revelation, which, as far as I'm concerned, might as well not be on the list at all. So this is their first album, and I mean, it's got some. It has got one or two nice moments. I mean, there's a bit. I wrote down a couple of bits of fragments of melody actually. Father, Son looks down with happiness. I like that bit. And I like it when Peter Gabriel sings, Man is wonderful, very wonderful. Now, because those two bits remind me of something that Genesis do quite well later on, which is, and here I'm going to go into my pedantry corner. Um, they mix the fourth chord of the scale with the major third of the scale in the melody. And I have this theory that all good pop music involves that clash, either there or in the relative minor. And somehow you're either always approaching that moment or coming away from that moment. I'll explain that on another day. But I think that's something they develop a lot later on. So you can already hear that there's a couple of moments where the Genesis melodic gift, I think particularly probably from Peter Gabriel, is already present. Plus there's a bit of Twilight Alehouse between a couple of the tracks, an early instrumental version of Twilight Alehouse, which later on turns into a much cooler track. But apart from that, yeah, this might as well not be by Genesis from my perspective. It's not even. It's an easy choice for 15, I would say. It also does raise the interesting question for me about whether Genesis are Christians,
Ooh.
because it's supposed to be a Christian album, and they also mention Christ's on trespass. I don't know, like,
Mm.
and there's a sort of religious element sometimes to some of this stuff. So I wonder whether they're brought up in the sort of Anglican church musical tradition, and I wonder whether actually any of them are sort of Christians in the same way that yes are Christians.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's my
Okay.
number 15. I suppose I should try to moderate this a little bit. So, Peter, would you like to give us your number 15 next?
Tim, it's exactly the same as yours.
Right.
Now, this is not Genesis to Revelation is not an album I know very well, and I did listen to the whole thing, but I found it even with other albums I don't like, this doesn't even reach like to their ankles because, and I think it's to do with the hesitancy of it. It's Peter Gabriel not playing his part. That's really, and the drumming, but apart from that, it's him. He's just not in the mode, is he? There's a few seconds where you think, oh, that's like the Gabriel we know, but he's too nervous almost to do his stuff on this album. So for me, that sort of holds the whole thing back. So yeah, it's a 15 from me.
Oh, that's interesting. Right. Okay. Yeah. So we've both mentioned Peter Gabriel there. So obviously
Mm,
we think that he is important in the early
yeah.
stages of the band. I think we can deduce that from what has been said so far. Sean, what's your number 15? Are you going to
Well,
surprise
it's
us?
I am. I am. It was a tough call for me because I did consider making from Genesis to Revelation number 15, but instead I've called on calling all stations, which I just find incredibly tedious and a dull listen, really. I think I've listened to it about once, and I tried to play
About.
it again, but I felt physically sick, so I didn't. The only song I can remember is Congo, which I think Ken Bruce played on Radio 2. And of course, it's got the singer from Stiltskin. Do you remember that great
Mm,
band, Stiltskin?
yeah, yeah,
He,
classic.
I mean, he did yeah, he did his best. That's about all I can say. But it's just, I don't know. They should have thrown in the towel. I did read that they tried to get Chester Thompson to play drums on the album,
Mm.
and he wanted to become a full band member. And Tony and Mike basically said, "Naff off," which was nice, wasn't it? After helping them
Years.
for so many
Yeah.
years.
Mm.
You know, so they recruited somebody called, I can't even read my Zid Zid Caillou, played percussion and drums. Does that
Right.
ring a bell with anyone? Didn't with me. So he did the live tour, but yes, I've gone for calling all stations.
I think Chester Thompson was probably well out of that live tour, from what I gather. I mean, they had to
Yeah.
close it down halfway through, didn't they, due to poor ticket sales.
Mm.
So He who laughs last laughs longest. Did I say that right? Yeah, Peter picked up on your comment there that you weren't even sure that you'd listened to it once. That was a good one. Um, all right, good. So, I mean, that's there's a sort of that makes sense because that takes me perhaps to my number 14, which is calling all stations.
Mm.
And yeah, I'm quite interested to see what you guys number 14 is after all of this. I mean, I think that yeah, apparently yeah, the Guardian described this album as inexplicable, which I think is probably just about right. Um, I mean, who knew that Phil Collins was so important to this band? We'd always thought that, probably, well, I'd always assumed that Phil Collins was like the least important member, even though obviously he was the most famous member and he was a singer. But, I always thought, well, he's probably just, he's along sort of out of a sense of equality. They've just, invited him to like a competition winner. but it turns out that as soon as he left, they collapsed. Yeah, I think Ray Wilson is not such an interesting singer actually as Phil. That's the thing. I mean, whether you prefer Peter's vocals or Phil's vocals, they're both great singers, aren't they? I think, and Ray Wilson is he's a really good singer, but he hasn't got quite as characterful a voice, I think. And so to me, it sounds a little bit like one of their Tony or Mike's solo albums, where they've got a hired hand singer, and that's not a good vibe, is it, for a Genesis album? I think it's not. I think, as Shaun was saying, it's not a terrible album. It's got one or two good moments. I like Congo. I like the opening track as well. And what's the third one? I can't even remember. Shipwrecks. That was cool. And and it's even like some of the later stuff the stuff later on in the album is all right, I think. But I think it's a bit sort of lackluster, and the writing, they sound like they sound sort of tired, like they're out of ideas, which is weird, isn't it? You think like two of the greatest, to me, the greatest rock writers, really, Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford, real safe pairs of hands, if you see what I mean. But between them, they just couldn't come up with the goods. So I think they probably had to shut it down after this, didn't they? Okay, so who's next then? It's Peter for 14.
For 14, yeah, calling all stations. Having only listened once and never having wanted to listen to it at all, it was disappointing. I think the production's good. I mean, that's one thing that just shines out of it. I mean, this is 1997 though. This is 27 years ago, believe it or not. I mean, it's a long time, but no, I couldn't really find anything redeeming in it at all. There's a few moments where you think, yeah, that's a nice little moment, but a nice bit, but there's nothing in there that particularly struck me. Shipwrecked, I remember that one, I think. Apart from that, no, there's nothing in it. So I've just sort of pushed it down to the bottom of the pile, really. But it's better than Genesis to Revelation, I have to say. I think it's, if I had to, and I was incarcerated, they offered me an album out of the two of those, I'd probably take Calling All Stations. The best I can say.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. So, Shaun, have you got from Genesis to Revelation?
So, well, you guessed it. It is, yeah. Well, you've said it all, really. It was a toss-up between that and Calling All Station. It to me, it sounds a bit like a very poor Moody Blues album, or even a Bee Gees album, actually. If you've listened to the Bee Gees, there's something Bee Gees-ish about it. But I think, there are a couple of bright sparks on there. I quite like the Conqueror and Where the Sour Turns to Sweet. But yeah, who was the drummer? It wasn't John Mayhew, was it? It was
Wasn't it John Silver?
John Silver.
Who were
Long
they at
John
school
Silver.
with?
It
Chris Silver, was
wasn't
it?
even Mayhew.
Somebody Silver.
Chris Silver. Was it Chris Silver?
Was it Chris Silver?
Yeah.
Maybe we could get him on the podcast. I think he
I
lives
think
in Australia.
I
I
think
don't know
he
if that's
became
possible.
quite I think he became quite a
Mm.
famous author afterwards.
Did he?
He wrote a book about, he came to live in Spain, I think, and he wrote a book called
Mm.
something like Trampling Across Oranges or something like that,
Oh,
which I obviously haven't read. Um,
yeah.
yeah, sorry,
Who
I'm
was it? Who was it who discovered them? That awful
yeah,
man that.
Jonathan King.
Jonathan
Oh,
King, yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, they're definitely
Mm.
under the the watchful tutelage of Jonathan King here, aren't they?
You don't think there was a casting couch or something?
Let's
Which
Notice
not
these
let's
are
not go there.
bookend.
which one of them? Sorry, you can edit that out, I think.
These are bookend albums as well, aren't they? This is like first and
Yeah,
last. It's
yeah,
interesting that
yeah,
those are the two we've chosen.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, according to my rather laboured metaphor before, this would be we're in. I think we're either in below League Two or in League Two here. But yeah, we've both got those at the
Oh
bottom, haven't
dear.
we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
All right, good. Well, let's go on to
Okay.
number 13 then. Cool. This is you have to concentrate with this.
Yeah.
Now, my number 13 is Invisible Touch. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's tricky, this, isn't it? It's very easy to say it's my number 13. It's slightly more difficult to explain why. The rationale,
Mm.
it comes a bit harder, doesn't it? I mean, it's this album is not really aimed at people like me. I think that's the best way I could say it. Although it is my wife's favorite Genesis album, I have to say. Um,
Many
there's-
people's favorite.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I guess it was the biggest seller, but I mean, I don't know
Mm.
because we haven't got Turner's Turntable this week to sort out that to sort out that issue for us.
Imagine how much I'd have to say.
Um, yeah, yeah, because In Too Deep is her favorite Genesis song.
Mm.
But yeah, can I? So yeah, I can appreciate this album in the way that I don't know, I can appreciate a Samuel Beckett play. I can sort of see why it's good, but I don't wouldn't necessarily want to sit through it. Um, I don't like they always say Genesis. Yeah, we went poppy, but we always kept the long stuff in there.
Mm.
But I don't. I quite like Tonight, Tonight, Tonight. Actually, that's probably my favourite song on it. But the what's the one Domino? That's the sort of
Yeah.
prog one, isn't
Yeah.
it? And I
Yeah.
really don't like that at all. I mean, I just find it so boring. And I know boring is an easy.
Mm.
I know boring is a boring comment to make that it's boring, but it
Mm.
is. I mean, there's nothing about that composition that I find interesting, at all. Um, so yeah, that's my number 13. Over to you, Peter.
My number 13 is, and then there were three.
Ah,
Yeah. I can't.
Shock.
Yeah, I know. And you know what? I have tried. And over the years, I have tried, and I cannot get into this at all. And in
Yeah.
fact, the irony of it, of course, is that we were saying on our last podcast that the final track, you have to end on a good track. Well, to be honest, it's the only thing I really like on the album anyway, is that last
Mm.
track, which is a terrible, sort of sycophantic, sort of horrible song, isn't it? Really, what's the word? Sort of sickening love song, basically. But it kind of
Follow
is the
you, follow
one,
me.
yeah, yeah. I cannot, and I think
Mm.
what it is it's where it's placed as well. It's the darkest corner of Genesis, this, isn't it? Because you get the fallout from Gabriel, and then there's this kind of tumbling down, isn't there? Which starts on a real peak, but it
Mm.
just seems to fall and fall until you get back to the early 80s. You only get to the early 80s and things start taking off then because they've discovered what it is they actually want to do. And I think on this album, it just doesn't it doesn't offer me anything in particular I like. And I know that's controversial because it is a liked album. I know you two like it, but for me, yeah, it comes as one of the lowest.
Mm.
I'm already starting to think that this ranking is going to be complete chaos.
It's going to be very
It
right.
is.
It will make numerical sense and little other sense. Um,
Oh,
because
dear.
that's I've got, and then there were three is way up there on my list. But anyway, we'll see. We'll see about that. That's a very interesting
Mm.
choice. What about you, Sean? Number 13?
Now, I'd gone with you, Tim. It's Invisible Touch. I mean, I remember being there at the time and the hype of this album coming out and thinking, what an awful album cover, absolutely awful. I don't know who did it. I don't even want to know. Um, but I just find it really pappy. I just do not like this era of Genesis. I know, they're entertaining, and I think if you saw them live, you'd probably have a good time, and they'd do their little oldies medley and all this sort of stuff. But I can only really think, well, there was Land of Confusion that had but that was more for the video, I think. You had the spitting image puppets, didn't you? As I remember. That was quite good. I'm sure there's a good bit in Domino, isn't there? There's a nice sort of melody,
Yeah,
isn't there?
yeah.
I'm sure there is. I like that bit of it. Put it
Well,
like that.
the
I
thing is
like
that
that bit of it.
in order for us to find that out, we would have to sit and listen to it again, which
This is it. I can't. It reduced me to tears. The thought of that being made to listen to it. But actually, there's a lot of people that like it. There's
Mm.
loads, and I always sort of think, if it wasn't for Steve, my big brother, who introduced me to Gabriel era Genesis and so on, if this was my entry point into Genesis, I don't think I'd be a fan. I just don't think I'd be bothered. So that's all I can say.
Great. So is
Duly
this your
noted.
yeah? Is this your theory that you were saying that like the worse the albums are, the worse the covers are? There's a sort of proportionality.
There's definitely, yeah, I think but then it slightly falls apart with, say, Foxtrot early on. I always think that's a bit of a rubbish cover, isn't it? I
Yeah.
don't mind Nursery Crime. That's all right, I think.
Then there
It's
were three.
all
Then
right.
there were three as a terrible album cover.
Hmm.
Do you think
Well,
that's hypnosis?
yeah.
It's
They
boring.
they re they reckon that was sort of hanging around, don't they? And they sort of said, "Here, I have this one." Well, I read somewhere. You can have it.
But I think, if I may, I think
Hmm.
Sean raises an interesting point, which is like, because I had this thought while I was compiling my list, like, what would it, does it make a difference? Because again, here we're dealing with like sets and subsets. Now, would it
Hmm.
make a difference if some of these albums were done by another band? I mean, like if this
Hmm.
was if they're does it? I mean, there's a relationship surely between like the place in the ranking and whether the fact that these are albums by Genesis, if you see what I mean. Like, I might
Right.
think Invisible Touch was all right if it was by Dire Straits, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I might think, oh, it's kind of a great album, but the fact that it's Genesis, I expect so much more, I think.
Yeah, I think that there is a certain amount of that. It's not about purely about music, is it? It's about your investment in them as a band and how much you expect back for your loyalty.
Do you,
That's
do you
right.
know one of the things that puts me off is I hate the use of keyboards uh, by the sort of mid 80s. That I don't know whether it's a Yamaha DX7 or whatever it is, or I don't know anything about keyboards, but you could argue in the early 70s, people would say, I mean, I know people, casual fans, will say, "Oh, I don't like those. It sounds really dated." That Tony Banks keyboards or whatever, but I kind of grew up with that, and it's a bit quirky. I'm used to it, but I just find it so cheap. It's like a sort of some of the keyboard sounds on Invisible Touch are like sort of children's toys or something. It's just puts me off. Can't
There's a
stand
bit in the middle of Tonight, Tonight, Tonight where it goes beep, boop, boop, boop. And it's like,
it.
every time I hear it, I think that's not. Do you think someone in the studio should have gone, yeah, we can't have that, obviously. I mean, you're kidding, aren't you? We can't have
Yeah,
that. Um,
it's kind of like in the Beatles. They introduced the Moog, or the what is it, the Moog, whatever it is. George
Moog, isn't
Harrison
it?
bought one in,
Moog, I think. Yeah.
but it's just a pure sound, isn't it? It doesn't actually sound that bad. It's just pure, you know, notes, isn't it? I don't know. But
Peter's,
yeah, the more you get
Peter's,
into synths,
Peter's just done
I
something.
Socks on.
He's done
yeah,
something, hasn't he?
it leaves me cold. So that's
Mm,
I know it's a well,
mm.
minor
But
thing,
yeah,
but I
but
started
yeah,
to.
Their
I
biggest
think
selling album.
biggest selling album. But yeah, I think as Peter was saying, it's like it depends what you're interested in. Are you interested in a
Mm.
song? So, for example, like I hate to bring this up again, but my wife loves In Too Deep. She just hears that,
Yeah, yeah,
like on
yeah.
the radio or something, you know,
Mm.
and it's quite in a sort of quite immediate kind of way, and says, oh, "This is
Yeah,
great," and then that's her
yeah,
experience of it. Whereas for me,
yeah.
like, and then I say, well, to her, well, we're going to be studying albums, on our channel, and it's like,
Mm.
oh, why, But or like, are you interested
Yeah.
in Genesis as a band? If you love Genesis, then you're interested
Mm.
in their albums as products of the. So again, it's
Yeah,
sort of we're back to set theory.
yeah.
That theory.
um, all right, good. Well, let's go to number 12. Um, by the way, if I mess up, feel free to interrupt because I think
Yeah,
there's a lot to focus on here. Okay,
I've
so
got it all.
all right, great. Thanks, Peter. So number 12, yeah, so my number 12 is the Genesis album, which
Mm.
we've just touched on actually. Um, I like this album about as much, or as little as I like Invisible Touch. I think there's a couple of good tracks on this album, in a way that there probably isn't on Invisible Touch for me, because obviously this is all just opinions. Just in case anyone was wondering, we are just giving our opinions here. It's not like
Mm.
we're, telepathically channeling in opinions from somebody else. We are saying what we honestly think about these things. Um, and I think that raises this slightly above Invisible Touch in my ranking. I like That's All, and I actually like Illegal Alien as a song, although it's racist. But maybe we can come back to that. But yeah, I don't know. Their music sort of at this point in their career, I think their music sort of starts to lose character for me.
Mm.
And I start to. Um, this happens with me with a lot of bands. At a certain point, I think they're great, and at a certain point, I think, oh, they're still just doing the same thing, and they've kind of lost touch with what it is that's interesting about their music. I think that starts to creep in here. And the other thing I've noted down is exactly as Sean was just saying. It's so awash with synths, like those sort of synth sounds that go, and it's quite. I agree with Sean. They're sort of revolting, aren't they? Some of them, and you think, well, why did they think this was? It was like a fad, wasn't it? I think
Yeah.
in the 80s, they all thought that they were
Oh,
moving things forward, and we were very, like we did an analysis, didn't we? The three of us, of brain salad surgery, and we were complaining about the synths in that. But the thing is, at least at that point, you could, there's the defense that the synths were sort of avant-garde, like they were doing
mm,
something. They had a sort of unique sound and things. By this point, they'd sort of, I suppose, they were imitating other instruments, but they were imitating instruments that you don't even know whether they exist or not. And so it all becomes horribly synthetic, the sound, and fortunately that phase only lasted a few years, and it worn off by the 90s, fortunately.
Mm.
So yeah, my number 12 is Genesis from 1983, I think it was.
yeah.
Peter, what about you? 12.
Well, my 12th one is actually Trespass, um, which is
Mm.
an album I listen to. I think that it's not, I don't sort of count it in really as one of the Genesis albums. I think it's yet another step. It's definitely a step beyond the very first album, but it's not an album I find particularly interesting. I find The Knife really nauseating. It's like they can't control the sounds on there at all. Peter Gabriel puts in a good performance here and there, but it's just a bit ploddy, I find. And the drumming, oh God, the drumming, it really drags that album down. I mean, all those
Mm.
great moments you think, well, if Phil Collins had just stepped in an album earlier, he would have made something of
Mm.
that album, I think. But it's just, I mean, that song, there's a song, some of the fills are just unbearable. I wonder whether I
Mm.
could have played on that album.
Uh,
So yeah, for me, it's just it's not worth listening to. Although, there are moments.
I
mm.
think it would have. I think that it would have been nice to hear Phil drumming on the knife, wouldn't it? I mean, that
Yeah.
might have made that song slightly
Yeah,
more interesting than it is.
yeah.
Mm.
Because yeah, I don't like that song at all. I mean, Genesis fans seem to bloody love it, but I mean, I
Mm.
can never work out why. It holds
They
very
and
little
they kept
interest for me. That
and they
song.
kept playing the knife live, didn't they? They brought that right through the nursery crime foxtrot period. They were still playing it, but with Phil.
Mm.
I know. This is like a sort of like it's like one of those plants that sort of outstayed its
Mm.
welcome. I was reaching for a metaphor there, but it didn't. I couldn't quite grasp it.
No.
Um, all right, good. Fair enough. Interesting. Trespass. Right. Sean, number 12.
Okay, well, before I announce my number 12, I'd just like to sort of say that really below about number 9, all of these albums for me are pretty much interchangeable. They're not, I'm not picking on an album. I'm not persecuting anyone. If you like this album, then, I'm sorry. But for me, there's a line and I don't go beneath it. Okay. So I'm about to say number 12 is Abacab.
Oh,
Um,
Bloody hell.
I can't stand it. I don't know why. They brought in Hugh Padgham. I hate the gated snare sound that he uses. I cannot stand it. I find it so 1980s. I mean, nobody's using it now. It was of its time. I think they're just trying to be like the Police. Oh, let's get the Police's producer. They're a good band, aren't they? They're great, which they are, but they've got a drummer that's
Yeah.
playing his nuts off, and Phil, it's just, I think for me, Phil Collins, he sort of became this entertainer. And, for drummers, I think it's like, oh, well, sod off then, go and do your, like that on every album. And everyone goes, oh, that's good, that bit of drumming, isn't it? Oh, that's good, isn't it? He's a good drummer, isn't he? No, he played on Cinema Show. Do you know what I mean? He robbery, assault, and battery, and so that gets on my wick a bit. But it's just a stylistic thing. It's not my cup of tea. Um, I can't stand the cover. It's so I don't know, screamingly bad 1980s. I mean it. But there you go. That's me. I suppose it's based on Matisse, like collage, but badly done in my opinion. But there you
Mm,
go. But
yeah.
I'm not picking on Abacab specifically. There are moments. Yeah, I don't mind Abacab, the title track, but not a lot else for me, really. Sorry.
all right. Great. I think we're going to have a new section in the podcast. We're going to need a new jingle. Sean's rants.
Yeah.
All right.
Ranty,
Brilliant.
ranty, ranty.
Great. Thanks, Sean. So
Okay.
let's go on to number. I'm going to come back. I'm going to push back on some of that later on. I'd
Okay.
just like to make
Okay.
that clear. But anyway, yeah. No, let's do number 11. Now, number 11, I have got "We Can't Dance," um, which is it's weird even saying that as if it's a Genesis album. It feels like a Genesis album at all. When I say "We Can't Dance," I think, oh, is that who's that by that album? That's like a
Mm,
Phil Collins album, isn't it? No, anyway, so
yeah.
yeah, it's "We Can't Dance." I put this above Genesis and Invisible Touch, and not to mention Calling All Stations, because I think that I have to say that there's some songs on here that I quite like.
Mm,
There's some songs on. There's no songs I really like on Invisible
Mm,
Touch. I quite like Tonight, but We Can't Dance. I think is a very slight return to form, and I realise that a lot of Genesis fans will find this inexplicable. But I liked it from the first time I heard it. I think I bought it when it first came out in 1981, and
mm,
I love the opening track. No Son of Mine. People might hate it. I think it's a great track.
yeah.
And Jesus, He Knows Me, and I think I Can't Dance is a great track. And I think even like some of the sort of I don't like the longer tracks too much, but I do like. Because I think they'd sort of lost the habit of writing good long songs by this point, even though they continue to do it. Um, but I quite like the closing track, Fading Lights. I think it's a very nice, it's got a nice melody. And
Yeah.
so I've got a bit more time for this album than I have some of the other. I mean, I feel like saying the 80s albums. Of course, We Can't Dance is 91, but it's like a sort of coda to the 80s, isn't it? Because of all those
Mm,
synth sounds and everything. A different 1990s emerged after this, I think, with Britpop and everything, and we were in a different sort of phase. But this thing feels like this sort of like a sort of honorary end to the 1980s. This album in terms of
Yeah.
production and everything. So yeah, that's my number 11. We Can't Dance. Peter.
This is really interesting because I'm watching it sort of turn round on my score chart here. I think we're going to have some clashes towards the end. Basically, we're sort of building up for something here. I've put The Lamb Lies Down actually for number 11.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
I mean, it's Gabriel era, but I really think it could have been shrunk down big time. This album, there's so much faffing on this, and it's the old White Album thing, and I don't know. I don't know what any of it means. I think the writing's sort of passe a lot of the time. Peter Gabriel sounds like he's doing an impression of someone, like doing an impression of Peter Gabriel. It doesn't even feel authentic, most of this. And it's this sort of crashing ending, isn't it, to his time with them? It feels bitter to listen back to, really, I think. So for me, it just doesn't hold that much interest. There are some bits on it which I think are really nice, a bit like, on The Wall, although I think The Wall is an amazing album. When you get to Comfortably Numb, you feel like you've reached this kind of pinnacle, don't you, of their writing on that. It's like
Mm.
amazing, sort of heavenly. There are moments, I think, on The Lamb where something great happens, but
Yeah.
they're very short-lived and
Mm.
it's sort of gone, like that. It's kind of, there are a few, but it's not enough to hold the album together for me.
Right. Well, thanks very much. That's interesting. I'm also going to say some bad things about the Lamb later. So stay tuned for that. And I think that, but I think that I'm imagining sort of some Genesis fans going out of their tree at this point, if they happen to be listening to this. But yeah, I thank you for your honesty. Yeah. Very good. So, Sean, number 11.
Yeah, number 11 is Genesis. It can't do Hall's Gallery this week, but it's got to be. I don't know. It's got to be the worst album cover. Just it's known as the Shapes album, isn't it? I think it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
children's plastic puzzle. I've no idea what relevance it's got to the album at all. Just think it piss poor, frankly, from them. I expect better. It's got dreadful synth drumming on it. I mean, Phil, and the thing is, what I suppose, you can't blame them. I mean, everybody was doing it. Bill Bruford was playing synth drums to sort of varying degrees of success, but everybody eventually packed it in. And I think the reason was it just sounded crap. So, you know, so to me, it's terribly of its time. There's a couple of decent tracks on it. I mean, I think I was like Home by the Sea and Second Home by the Sea. That's probably the only bit on the album. Funny enough, Joe Butler commented and said this was her favourite album, and I remember now. Yeah, it was because I was kind of in that crowd at school, and I was always like, "Oh, I prefer, you know, Selling England by the Pound or Foxtrot,
Mm,
or whatever it was that week." It was like, "Oh, they're awful." They sound so old-fashioned. You know. Um.
yeah.
Anyway, that's it. I've said my piece. It's going to hurt some people, but there you go.
This is our comments are bound to get more positive at some point. So stick with us.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Um,
there's a natural kind of course to this, isn't there? No matter
mm,
what the album, we're heading
Yeah.
towards more positivity.
yeah, that's right. By the way, I think that's the second mention for Joe Butler in in this
JB.
podcast. So I don't know if our sort of international listeners know who Joe Butler is.
No, she
Um,
won't be listening.
she
So
won't be listening. No,
no, she won't be listening.
she'll say I prefer the later stuff or something. Yeah. Um, all right, good. Well, we're making good progress.
Mm.
Um, so number 10 then. Now this is, I mean, this is controversial, to compete with Peter's controversial placing just now. Um, Number 10 for me is Wind and Wuthering. Um, Genesis fans, particularly prog Genesis fans, seem to bloody love this album. They love it. And for the life of me, I cannot work out why. Here we are. This will be my rant, right? This comes just after Trick of the Tail. And
Mm.
I think Trick of the Tail, we'll come back to this later on, is one of their greatest albums. This is not a patch on Trick of the Tail from my perspective, right? Not a patch on it. It's not, it's got almost nothing about it that I like. Um, Even there's a couple of songs on it that I think are all right. The 11th Earl of Mar, um, and Blood on the Rooftops. I quite like those two, but even those, I think they're I think they're sort of overwritten. They're not written in a sort of very pleasing or sort of rational way, in the way that the stuff on Trick of the Tail is. It almost feels to me like they did Trick of the Tail and it was so great, and then they were just like, right, we're in the swing of it now.
Mm.
Let's do another album, and it was just like it just was a complete, feels like a face plant, the whole thing, as young people say today. And then of course, I mean, One for the Vine, which again people seem to think is a prog classic. I think it's crap. I mean, I think it's like, we're going to get some feedback on this, aren't we? I think it's like a poor imitation of a long prog track of the type that they previously had done so well. And the less said about the instrumentals, the better at the end, the better. But also, one final thing, it's got the absolute abomination of Your Own Special Way on it,
Mm.
which I mean, I feel like, Mike Rutherford, Mike Rutherford should have had his hands cut off after that. You know. Um, so yeah, sorry to disappoint people, but I cannot stand this album, and I mean, I dislike it so much I never play it really. Anyway, Peter, number
Yeah.
10.
Yeah, I'm with you there, Tim. Number 10 is Wind and Wuthering.
Oh.
I think, to be honest, that's Your Own Special Way is a bit like Rush's Tears, isn't it? It's sort of that level of cynical writing. It's horrible. I think this album is a real disappointment. If you'd just gone through Trick of a Tail, and you were sort of moving up through, it's kind of, there's a kind of sadness to the whole feel of this album. It just doesn't feel, there's no joy in it at all. There's nothing in it that sort of grabs me. They're trying to, and All in a Mouse's Night and things like that. They're trying to sort of bring the joy up, I think, but it just doesn't seem to bite in the same way that they could do. And they can do it better. It's that thing going back to what we're talking about, this sort of investment, which is what they've just achieved is so great. And then you've suddenly got this to follow it. It's like, my God, what's going to happen next? Well, what happened next, as far as I'm concerned, was just as bad. But obviously, that's my opinion. But yeah, I can't really. I don't play this album very much. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like you play things to remind yourself, don't you, of like whether you like it or not, or maybe you've grown into it. I don't know, but it's strange the way people get so fanatical about certain things, isn't it? Which you cannot understand. I guess it's the same for us, though, isn't it? We probably love stuff that other people think is awful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
Yes, there's
yeah.
no.
It's a 10 from me.
It's a 10. It's a 10. Yeah, it's like they always say, like, the way that love works is that if you love somebody, it feels so real to you. But if you try to explain it in words to another person, you know, to try to make your love for that person make sense to a third person, you'll never do it. It's impossible, right?
And also, you love the band, warts and all. Despite not
Mm,
liking certain albums, you can still find
mm.
something to
mm,
like, but
yeah,
you're just disappointed in them.
yeah,
What's it? Love the sinner, hate the sin. Love,
Yeah.
yeah.
love the band,
Yeah.
hate the album.
Mm. Yeah.
It is. I've just described Wind and Wuthering as sinful. There you are. Um, all right, great. Sean.
Yeah, number 10, I've got We Can't Dance. I think you're right, Tim. You said it was a slight return to form. And I kind of like Phil's drumming on this again. For me, he's coming back to the world of proper drumming and drum sounds, and it's got a nice tone. So I like that as a sort of semi-retired drummer. Um, yeah, I quite like Fading Lights. There's a few bright spots on it, is all I'll say. The cover's a bit still a
Mm,
not very good cover, to be quite
it's
honest.
very
God,
90s.
I don't know if it's to do with No Son of Mine or something like that. But the song "Driving the Last Spike," did you
Yeah.
know it was about the Irish navvies?
Yes.
Phil Collins, yeah. And did you know where Phil got the inspiration from?
No.
Well, the
Well,
story of the Irish navvies in the States.
his great mate Dennis Waterman of Minder fame gave him a book all about it, and then he went and wrote the song. He wrote the theme
Um,
tune and sing the theme tune. Him. So there you
wow.
go.
It's difficult to it's difficult to conjure, isn't it? The image of Dennis Waterman in the minds of the international audience. Um,
He could have been the fourth member of Genesis, couldn't he?
May as well have been.
he was an actor in sort of kind of like slightly low grade TV dramas, wasn't he? But he
Hmm.
wasn't a very good actor, and he also wrote songs. So I don't know
Mm.
if it was music that brought them together. Um, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, good. Well, thanks for that. Let's go on to number nine then, right?
Yeah.
Now number nine, I've got Duke. Um, I mean, once again, I think this is a. I say once again, but actually, I was going to say once again, this is not a bad album. But I've said all the previous albums have been bad. But like, I don't know, like Calling All Stations again. It's a bit like if this were by another band, maybe it wouldn't be so. You wouldn't think it was quite so bad. So I think Duke is not like that bad an album. But it feels to me slightly stale, slightly sort of tired. I think it's got great moments, and I think it's got a few really nice tracks on it, and I quite like the Duke Suite, but it feels to me like they're not really breaking any new ground at all here. And actually, my memory of this album is that it was a big hit. I mean, I remember, sort of my aunt and uncle had a copy, which was my kind of like, which is my measure. That means that it's kind of like, it's a sort of house. I mean, it's like a household name album. In my imaginary. It was an album that a lot of people, sort of perhaps middle class people, bought and had copies of in their homes
Mm.
in England at a certain time, and it's we're not dealing with people here who are particularly sort of sophisticated when it comes to their rock music tastes. I'm trying to be as polite as I can. I hope none of them are listening. But yeah, so my number nine is Duke. I think it's a sort of I think it's a rather stale sounding album, despite all the sort of great moments. That's my conclusion. Peter, number nine.
This is turning into such a controversial conversation because actually my number nine down here, I've got Foxtrot.
Oh,
God, you
Interesting.
must be wondering
wash your mouth out.
what have I left in reserve? The thing is, because I've got the list here, you probably can't, unless you were like poker players, you probably wouldn't remember what I'd already said. But yeah, it's Foxtrot. And
Yeah.
I think it's that dip thing again, which is I find it a disappointing partner album to Nursery Crime.
Mm.
It's not. There's again a few bits I like, but on the whole, no, I'm not really a big fan of it. I think the artwork on the front as well is really, I mean, it's poorer than Nursery
Yeah.
Crime, definitely. That's not a reason to hate the album, of course, but they do affect me, I think, album covers a bit.
Mm.
If you listen to everything in the abstract, with no art and everything, I wonder how that would sort of change the way I see things. But yeah, I just think they can do better, and obviously they have because I've got eight other ones I think I prefer.
Right. Good.
Mm.
I really feel like you're in the vanguard here, Peter. I'm loving this because I'm not a fan of Foxtrot either, and I've got a few choice words to say about it. But you've got in there first, so if we get any
Sorry.
backlash in the comments,
Mm.
they might be aimed at you rather than me. I'm bringing up the rear. Um, all right, good. So number nine, Sean. What about you?
Yeah, number nine. You see, for me, we've now got into the territory where, yes, I've got my favourites, but I'll listen to any of these nine albums quite happily without putting my blood pressure up or having a moan about Phil Collins' drum sound or whatever it is. So number 9, anyway, I apologise, but it's Duke. So yeah, I think I, I've actually written down here. I've put last prog album. I kind of think this is the last album where you could have slotted, because I think, and then there were three and Duke. You could have slotted Steve Hackett if you threatened him and held a gun to his head and tied one arm behind his back. I think you could have got him to do it. Obviously not, but stylistically, he could have probably added something to these albums. But I think after that, I think no, he's out of there. He's completely the wrong player for the 1980s. But I quite like it. I quite like it's the album art. It's Lionel Koechlin, a Belgian illustrator. I quite like that. Quite like the naive character of Albert and everything. It kind of links it for me, makes it into a little bit of a concept album. And it's yeah, that's the way I see it. That's their goodbye to all that. I know, and then there were three probably really was, but I think after Duke, for me, it's like, oh, certain songs are okay, but please don't make me listen to all of it. So that's probably where I am on that. So number 9, yeah, Duke.
Mm.
Great. Well, interesting. Yeah, we both had Duke at number 9. Although by this point, I'm thinking really it's chaos, isn't it, basically.
Yeah.
Um, okay, let's go on to number 8. Now, at number 8, I have got The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Um, I only like. I've decided. I only like 3 songs on this. I like. Keep in mind it's a double album, right?
Yeah.
I only like the opener, which I think is great. I like the last track. A lot of other people seem to hate it. I like the last track. I think is a nice ending. And I also like the Lamia. I think it's got a nice tune, which they then reprise later on, actually. Apart from that, I don't like any of it. I think it's all filler. And it's just got none of the stuff in it that I like about Genesis, and this is why it's important to point out to people, because sometimes people have problems conceptualizing this. This is just opinions, right? The only thing, about an opinion is I think at least it should be honestly felt, and honestly expressed. And that's, I think, what we're trying to do here. I mean, I think none of the music here is properly composed. And I think that the ideas are thin on the ground. There's almost no through composition whatsoever, which is precisely what I like about Genesis. Plus, some of it appears to be improvised, which I think is scandalous, for a band like this. I mean, King Crimson can do that, but Genesis can't. I'm sorry, but they're not that, to me, they're just not that sort of band. I like the Genesis of Firth of Fifth, where it's all properly composed and very interesting structure and everything. This stuff business about fly on a windshield or the waiting room, let's get some evil sounds going in the waiting room or something. It's like, what are you doing? I mean, this is and yeah, as Peter already has pointed out, the story I find unfathomable. So that's my number 8. Peter, what about you?
My number 8 is actually Genesis, the album. 1983, is it?
Yep, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, it was slightly tainted by the fact. I remember someone telling me that like an older guy who worked at the police, who said, "Oh yeah, we used to listen to that during the miners' strike." So I thought it was a horrible image.
Do you mean the police or the band, The Police?
Yeah. Actually, the Police just about split up, didn't they, that year? I think 83 was when they did split up. Listen, Genesis, I know it's a slightly like it's an odd sort of time for them, I think, this, but I find this album really engaging, actually. And Mama is a blowaway song. I think it's fantastic, and it really brings Phil Collins' vocals, doesn't it? It shows you what you can really do, I think, finally, and the simplicity and the cleanliness of it. I think this is why you're going to find a lot of those older albums have been further up the list, in sort of 15, 14, 13. because there's something about the sound that they get to at this point which I really like. It seems very organized, purposeful. I quite like the synth sort of sounds, the synth drum sounds. That's all is really good. I like Home by the Sea, Illegal Alien. I don't think you can ever forgive Silver Rainbow though. That's the thing that's really like it's horrible, that song, isn't it? But apart from that, I think there's a lot of good songs on this album, and I think it's produced in a way which is opening up a much wider audience. And so be it. I think that the songs are as good. It's just there's a kind of organizing to it, which I just find more pleasing, actually.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, I'm realizing that as some of us have pushed earlier albums down the list slightly, we're going to get some shocks, aren't you? Like when all of a
Yeah,
sudden
yeah,
Peter confesses to liking the Genesis album, just when you weren't expecting it.
yeah, yeah.
Well, no, that's very interesting. I mean, I don't think it's. I mean, we're not supposed to respond to each other, are we? Otherwise, we'll be here all night. But I don't think it's necessarily a bad album. I just don't get it. I don't get it. And the fact that you do, I think is terrible. No, great. No, it's great. It's great. Um, all right, good. So, Sean, what about your
Yeah.
number eight?
So I've got Trespass at number eight. Yeah, I quite like it. It's a little bit folky. It's Genesis sort of was their first real sort of statement, isn't it? Anthony Phillips on guitar. Terrible drum. Sorry, John Mayhew is very sort of laggy, isn't he? And it's like he
Yeah.
barely learnt to play, really. It's like somebody's shown him how to play a beat and he's just about managed it. It's very basic. I mean, it's a wonder they just didn't get Peter Gabriel to drum on it, really. He could have done. Um, the cover's a bit poor, I always think. It's not really
Mm.
a lot of blue, pale blue space, and there's the knife stuck in the canvas. I suppose that was
You know what?
reaction.
It
So,
looks a bit like they didn't make the cover, doesn't it? It looks like
mm,
it's so badly done. It looks like a
mm.
photograph of a cover that someone
Yeah, yeah,
else
yeah,
made.
yeah,
It doesn't even look like it's been made for
yeah.
them.
No, it's
I,
very, very
I, I got
fine
you
together.
know, the sort of CD reissue version, which looked like a photograph of a photograph of a cover.
Yeah. Oh dear. I mean, I quite like the knife, but again, if Phil Collins had played on it, it'd be blooming
Mm.
brilliant. You can imagine the sort of fills he'd have played. I like Stagnation. They kept playing that, didn't they, in their sort of medleys later on. Um, what else was I going to say? No, that's it. That's it. So number eight, Trespass.
All right, brilliant. Well, is there any evidence that Peter Gabriel could play the drums? I mean, I know he claimed to be a drummer, and he did keep
It
hitting that
is.
bass drum, didn't he?
Do you know, I don't know. Yeah, they didn't Phil Collins ban him from playing the bass drum, didn't he, in the end?
Mm, yeah. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's an interesting observation. I hadn't thought about that before. Maybe he could have done the drumming, but
Yeah.
I just don't know. I don't know
Mm.
whether he had the technical ability, but
Yeah.
I imagine that would be terribly frustrating for a drummer to have someone else also playing
Yeah.
bass drum.
Yeah.
Like,
What
yeah.
what do
stop.
you what do you make on Anthony Phillips, by the way? We haven't really mentioned him a lot, if at all, have we? Guitar
Well,
wise.
well,
Is it?
I mean, yeah, I mean, maybe Peter should. Peter, do you have a view on him as a guitarist, Anthony Phillips?
No, not really. I don't think that you really notice the guitar, do you, until you get to Steve Hackett, really. I don't think you really notice it in the songs until you get to like Nursery Crime. It's not a significant part. It's more organy, actually, isn't it, Trespass? A bit
Mm.
more sort of,
Because
angst.
he wrote he had quite a part in Musical Box, I think, didn't he? He's responsible for that, and it's on one of his later albums. I don't know if it's Private Parts and Pieces or someone will say my brother
Yeah.
Steve, but it's that
Mm.
that riff I
Hello,
think was
Steve.
working. Shout out to Steve. But so he was obviously writing, quite important in the writing
Well,
process.
they obviously all had like what they call a transference with him. They were all
Mm,
like they thought he was like the key member, didn't they? All of them. But yeah, he's sort of half forgotten, isn't he? Because we don't
mm.
really know, quite how important he was
Oh,
to the band at that point.
hello.
I think he was. They did They did a lot of sort of that twin guitar
Everything's froze.
pastoral stuff,
Yeah,
didn't they?
yeah. Did we had
Um,
a dropout then? Did anyone notice, or was it just me? It was
um,
me.
I didn't notice anything.
Oh, it's my internet. It's gone off.
I'll make a
It's
note
back.
of it.
Stagnate. I mean, they did that sort of stagnation. You said is an important track, and I think that's right. I mean, they sort of kept coming. That's a great track, isn't it? They kept coming back to
Mm,
that. I mean, really, Supper's Ready is like stagnation part two, isn't it? Yeah, I think.
yeah.
I always think. Um, all right, lovely. Well,
Mm.
let's plow on, and I mean plow on. Um, Number seven. I've got Foxtrot here. Number seven. I completely agree with what Peter said that it's a drop off after Nursery Crime. Now, again, that's an extremely controversial thing to say in Genesis circles because proggers seem to think that this is almost their best album, and the band themselves seem to think that this was their best album. But for me, that's I don't. Again, I don't get it. I don't know why they think that. I really don't like this album. And I love early Genesis stuff. You know, I'm a really big fan of all the early Genesis stuff, really. But it's just this album is a low point for me. I think that I like. I don't really like any of it. I like Watcher of the Skies a bit. I think it's got some nice ideas in it, but it suffers from me. This is where I get boring, but it suffers from me from two structural problems. I think it's repetitive,
Mm.
like, you know, they didn't write it correctly, and I think the opening is too long, which I know is controversial because people say, "Oh, that's the best bit in the whole of Genesis," you know, like the Mellotron opening to Watch of the Skies. But it goes on much too long. It doesn't make any sense, you know.
Mm,
And in my opinion, you know,
mm,
I think Can Utility in the Coastlines is all right, but I think it's a bit. It's not. It's a bit B-side-ish. It sounds to me like a bit like it's not their greatest work, even though it's got a couple of nice little ideas in it. Um, Again, I think it goes on perhaps slightly too long. Now, Supper's Ready. This is the really controversial one, isn't it? Because
mm,
this is a lot of people's sort of favourite Genesis track. I suppose because it's a 23-minute track, which I think was the only one that they did, wasn't it? So it's their contribution to the genre of the almost sidelong prog epic because it's got that Steve Hackett piece at the beginning, isn't it? I can never work out how they managed to fit so much music on one side of an album, but
Yeah.
anyway, I think that I like Supper's Ready, but I do think it's moving. But I only like the beginning and the end, and I think it loses its way in the middle. I think that the whole structure, the total structure, doesn't work from my point of view. I think that when they get to wearing feelings on our faces while our faces took a rest. That bit is like they've just gone into something irrelevant at that point. I quite like Willow Farm, but I can't work out at that point. They've already lost me by that point, and I have to. I
Mhm.
feel like I'm just like killing 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 minutes before Apocalypse in 9/8 finally comes in and the chat pick starts again. But having said that, actually, I mean, I like the sort of ending and that, but again, as I sort of I think just mentioned, I think that they'd sort of done this already with Stagnation. So the idea that this is their paradigm early piece has never convinced me. And I hope that people will give my opinion a hearing. Yeah, so that's me. Seven is Foxtrot.
mm,
Peter, what about you?
You're loving all this. We Can't Dance is number seven.
Hmm,
mhm,
You know
interesting.
what? I think there's a kind of dishonesty to what I'm about to say anyway, but it kind of makes sense because I don't really know the album that well because it's actually a double album. There's a lot of it, and it's some of it. Quite a bit of it is
mm,
quite sort of what do you call it? Like sluggish. Especially "Hold on My Heart" is that terrible look into what Phil Collins does, isn't it? This kind of thing he does. It's a romantic ballad, which I don't like. But I think the first three tracks on the first side and I Can't Dance are so good and they sound so great. I love No Son of Mine. I think it's wonderful. And I love the Jesus He Knows Me. I think it's brilliant. And it's sort of hanging off the back of um, Invisible Touch, isn't it? It feels like it should have been on there, really. I remember the video and well for that. And then Driving the Last Bike, I think it's a wonderful track. So I feel like it's a bit sort of disingenuous for me to say this, but it's like I think that's enough of it for me to say that I like this album, and I think actually that it's a real kind of last blast for them. I think it's good, and I think the production's great as well. But I think that's kind of it, isn't it? Really, that's the dying, the dying call of a whale.
Yeah, the dying of the light.
Mm.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
well, especially because it ends with the song "Fading Lights," which is like we're off. I mean,
yeah.
we're done. But then they carried on. Um, yeah, but I no, I feel very moved. I feel quite moved by your comments. It's got a lot of good moments. Even something
Mm.
like, I mean, now that you say it, that song track two on side two, because I had the album with the double, and
Mm.
there is never a time to say that's all right. I mean, that's a pretty good song. But yeah, I don't know. Some of the sort of licks that they use, "All My Life" and things. What's that? Track six. They've done it before, I think. So there is some retreading of old ground. But yeah, that's great. That's really interesting. All right, great.
Mm.
Well, there's some interesting surprises here. Sean,
Yeah.
what about your number seven?
Yeah, I've got Wind and Wuthering because I had to put it somewhere. Um, so yeah, I do agree. After Trick at the Tail, this is a little bit flat, but it's I mean, was supposed to be inspired by one of the Brontes novels, wasn't it? So it is a fairly somber sounding album, I
Mm.
always think. It's Hackett's last. It can't have been an easy album to make because he was, I don't know, he was off crushing wine glasses, wasn't he? Um, and having rows about, which of his songs they were going to reject next, this sort of thing. So it's a bit of the George Harrison's going on, I think, there really. But I think when he did knuckle down, I think, I really like Blood on the Rooftops, and probably that's it's it's a I would say that's an underrated song, which I've come back to years later and quite
Mm.
enjoy. Yeah, I don't particularly like Your Own Special Way. It goes on, well, it goes on and on, doesn't it? It bloody could be 3 minutes long, really, couldn't it?
Mm.
All in a Mouse's Night, that was another one that sort of scurrying around background instrumental. And it's just awful, isn't it? It's very childish.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, so basically, I've only said that I like one track. Oh, 11th Earl Lamar, I like. I don't mind the instrumentals I quite like on it. I don't mind the artwork. I like the drumming. So for me, that puts it at number seven.
Right, that's good. Yeah, I do like. I like that idea. Touch of the George Harrisons. That's deep. I mean, yeah. I think, but I like Blood on the Rooftops. I think
Mm,
that is a really good. I think that's the only track that's really successful on the album from
yeah.
my taste. But the thing is that I think it's some people like prog rock because they just like prog rock.
Yeah.
Mm,
Whereas I don't, so some people might like Wind and Weather because it's a prog rock album, but
mm,
that's not enough for me. I like
No.
prog rock. I do like prog rock, but that's because I like the way a lot of the prog rock bands write. But I don't like prog rock for the sake of it. I just think that it happens that a lot of the prog rock bands were the best writers of
Yeah.
tunes and stuff.
yeah.
I think people get confused about that. They join the club, but they don't sort of see the criteria that makes you a member. Like that their membership is based upon the badge called prog, and that's it. It doesn't matter
I,
how. There's terrible
yeah,
prog albums out there,
yeah, there
really
are.
bad, because it obviously is a genre that can be done so badly.
Mm,
Because you're just opening yourself up, aren't you? For sort of, the Moody Blues have shown that. You're opening yourself up for sort of terrible stuff, but they like the idea of kind of it being a club. This I like this, but actually you've got to be a bit more analytical, I think, than that.
I think it kind of reminds me of Yes, really, when they're done going for the one, and then they brought out what was the next one? Bloody hell, my brain's going. The other
Tomato.
word, Tomato, which there's some good stuff on it, but that was kind of their demise, wasn't it? Of
Yeah.
70s Yes, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think
Yeah, it's
that
quite.
the it was like anything that's generic, isn't it? Anything that's of a genre is probably not very good. I mean, what happens is that with great art, is that it emerges from a genre, but then it universalizes it. So
Mm,
it
mm,
sort of emerges from within, the generic to the universal, as it were.
Mm.
And that's like the difference between, for example, the Beatles and I don't know, like
mm,
Elvis Presley. I mean, again, we'll probably offend someone by saying this, but like why are the Beatles better than Elvis? Well, because they take a generic style and
mm,
make it kind of like genuinely universal and
mm,
interesting. And so Genesis are really my favorite band, but that's because
mm,
I think they're such great writers. But the fact that they're a prog band is part of that because
mm.
great writers want to do more interesting things. But that they're not great because they're prog, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's probably drop that because we're gonna
We could go
insult our
round in
own audience.
circles, couldn't we?
Exactly.
Uh,
All right.
Insult the panel. Insult the panel. Oh dear.
All right, good. Let's go on to six then. I've got Trespass at number six. Special place in my heart, Trespass, because for me, this is where Genesis really starts. I love the way that Looking for Someone comes straight in. That first
Mm,
line with Gabriel, it's like, oh, that's beautiful. It's completely weird, completely different as well, and sort of like unexpected. I like all of Trespass. I find it a very listenable album. It's not their greatest, but that's why I've got it number six. But like, I like the first four tracks. I really like. I find the last couple of tracks slightly charmless. I'm not into Dusk or The Knife, but I can, as long as unless if I forget to switch it off, I will listen to the till the end. Um, Good. So that's my number six, Peter.
Duke and number six for me. Really like this album, and I think it's there's only really a couple of tracks I don't like on this album. They're on side two, and that's sorry, I've got it in front of me here, and that's Please Don't Ask,
Please don't.
Cul-de-sac. They're on but side two, but you've got a really good run of songs there and a couple of great singles. I always really like Misunderstanding. I thought was good. I like Turn It On Again. Sounds predictable, but somehow they make it in, it sounds obvious, but they somehow make it into a great song. The guide vocal part between Duchess and moving on to Man of Our Times, I like all those songs. They're good. And again, it's the production. Something about the way in which they shifted from the old style Genesis after Hackett Goes and then into this new way. It's like Duke feels like the turning of a key for me. It's like this is sort of opening up something, and it doesn't just fall on its face, and kind of nothing happens afterwards. They then actually do quite well with it, I think, and that style sticks. And I think it's Phil Collins ultimately wrestling everything off everyone, it seems to be, because the band sort of turns into his band, doesn't it? But I really like Duke, and it's always had a special place in my listening. I really like it.
You like it much more than and then there were three. Obviously, you love it.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
yeah.
Yeah. There's a run of three really bad songs, isn't there, on side two? Is it Alone Again Tonight or something? It's one written by each one of them where they
Alone
sort of.
Tonight, Cul-de-sac, Please Don't Ask.
That's right. Yeah,
Please Don't
Cul-de-sac
Ask is horrible. Yeah, I
is
don't
horrible.
like
Yeah, Cul-de-sac is like the worst Tony Banks song I've ever heard.
that.
Um,
It's done a few.
Yeah.
yeah, but not too many in Genesis actually. But
No,
anyway,
no, on
uh,
his own
he
albums. Well, he
left them
won't
for his
come.
solo albums.
He definitely won't come on the podcast now.
um, all right, good. Well, Sean, number six.
Yeah, number six I've got, and then there were three. I don't mind the cover. I think I've explained before. Yeah, it's hypnosis, isn't it? It's okay. I always think this album's it's a bit American centric, this one, isn't it? Because you've got stories of Indians, Ballad of Big, etc. Um, is this where Phil Collins gets into the Alamo, do you think? Because he's a
Yeah.
collector of Alamo, Davy Crockett memorabilia, isn't he? I wonder whether it started then,
Hmm.
1978. Anyway, there's some good tracks on there. You know, I like Burning Rope, Snowbound, The Lady Lies. It's kind of like the last gasp of that Genesis sound, and it's definitely an album I think the guitar playing's all right on it. I can definitely hear. It's such a shame. I think that Steve Hackett left because I think he would have contributed really well to this album. He would have fitted into it pretty well. But obviously he did a George Harrison, didn't he? And disappeared. Um, actually did disappear. But yeah, so that's my number six. I'm just going to stand up because I'm getting cramped. So
Right.
I don't
These are
want
the kind of people you're dealing with, viewer.
I don't want to start
This is
screeching on air. Sorry about this.
this is gold. We'll leave this in. Um, all right, good. So,
Carry on.
well, let's do number. Thanks for that, Sean. Let's do number
Okay.
5. Yeah. Now, I mean, this is where it gets interesting for me. This is going to mess up your rankings. Um, I've got Abacab at number 5. Right.
Mhm.
Now, normally one would assume that a Genesis ranking would probably go in reverse chronological order, more or less. But I love this album. It's a bit like Peter was saying about the Genesis album. It means something to him, or We Can't Dance. Like I think, and it's also this is related to what I was saying before about I don't just like bands because like I don't rule out that they could do a good album in the pop phase, the more poppy phase. Although this isn't completely poppy. But I think that I just love this album. I think it really works as a pop album. And it's got some slightly interesting longer songs on as well, I think. I actually think that, I mentioned this to you guys before. I think this could have been a double album. They actually had a surfeit of material here. And I think it's all brilliant because after they put out Abacab, they put out I think it was 3x3 EP it was called, and it was 3 outtakes
yeah.
from Abacab. I think they're all brilliant. And the band don't think much of them, but I think they're great tracks. I won't try and remember the titles now, but I often listen to
Wasn't
this.
it?
What's that?
Paperlate, wasn't it?
Paperlate, yeah, that's right. Which
I
is
like that. Actually,
it's
like
good.
yeah.
And um, me and Bobby McGee. No, me and
Sarah Jane, wasn't it?
Sarah
no,
Jane.
me and Virgil.
Oh, that's it.
And you won't recall, I think the third one's called.
Oh, yeah.
But I often listen to this. They had a couple of interesting outtakes as well. Submarine and Naminanu, I think it was called. So basically, they were trying to put together a sidelong epic, which they eventually abandoned the idea, a bit like on Duke. And so there's some outtakes from the Dodo Lurker sequence. Basically, you can listen to this album. I often listen to it just as a double. I have it on a playlist. That makes me sound like a real nerd. But I just love all the tracks on the album and all the outtakes as well. So I'm into a sort of deluxe version of Abacab myself. And I think the fact that the outtakes are so great makes me like the album more, I have to say. So I'm slightly biased on that front. But I just think it all works so well. The opening track and the, No Reply at All, I think it's awesome. And Me and Sarah Jane, I think is a brilliant track. I just love it. It's got so many great bits. I don't like the last 2 tracks too much, but they're all right. So yeah, that's my number 5, Abacab. These rankings are going to be meaningless, aren't they? When they're like the collective ranking at the end is going to be completely meaningless. Anyway, well, we'll do it anyway. Good, Peter.
Collective rankings might be interesting though, because I'm seeing it develop right now in front of me. Oh yes. Now this is going to throw everything out of the water. This is because my number 5 here is actually Invisible Touch.
Wow.
You must have been wondering why hasn't he mentioned Invisible Touch? Maybe I didn't know it was an album by Genesis.
I'd forgotten who'd mentioned what at this point.
Well, look, the thing is about Invisible Touch is that whether or not you like the single, this album has such a great track on, which is Tonight, Tonight, Tonight. It is a brilliant piece of writing, I think, that superb, and it's worth listening to side 1 just to get that. There's something really organic about the writing, I think, of that song in particular. It's a beautiful piece of writing. I love it. And it's got dynamism and drama in it. I think it's a wonderful thing. Land of Confusion, of course, I really like the single as well. Plus the Domino part and the Brazilian, actually, I even like. I wouldn't have a Brazilian if I was asked to, but I do like the track, the Brazilian. The other tracks, not so sure of, but it kind of beats its way nearer to the front, this album, somehow. Again, as the production thing, I really like it. I know Sean was saying about keyboards and things. I think think I can see why people find it slightly sickening, but then if you're a Genesis fan, this is probably quite hard work if you're coming from somewhere completely different. But I think if you just take it as it is, it's quite an album, and the live shows were absolutely fantastic for this album as well. You know, it all sort of comes together here. So for me, it's 5.
Well, maybe you'd like to discuss it with my wife.
Yeah, my wife.
Uh, I'm loving this. I'm really enjoying it. Okay, Sean, number 5.
Okay, my number 5 is Foxtrot. Um, I see. I liked Supper's Ready. I like the fact it's all stitched together. That it's kind of random and a bit sort of. I think it's a bit Python-esque. Um, I like the long tracks. I don't think it's as good as say something like Close to the Edge. It feels a little bit clunky in comparison, and I think we've said before in our Genesis Selling England podcast that they kind of got their, excuse me, SHIT together on Selling England. That's a little bit clunky, but I like it. It's humorous. I like Apocalypse with 9/8. I like the start. I like Willow Farm. You know, it's fine. I spent hours as a teenager listening to this probably in the dark. You know, I am probably a prog fan, so I'm kind of into this stuff. I love the drumming. I love the drum sound. He's still a little bit jazzy at this point because he's drumming. I mean, you can't knock him. His drum technique changes, doesn't it? Album by album, really. Um, I see. My favourite track on the whole album actually is "Can Utility and the Coastliners." I absolutely bloody love it. I, I think I think it's amazing. It just there's something in it that stimulates the old cerebral
Mm,
cortex. I don't know how. Um,
mm.
again, I love the drumming in it. My only criticism of it is that it should be Canutility and the Coastliners.
Yeah,
It shouldn't be Canute at all. And
yeah.
once again, Peter Gabriel perpetuates this myth that King Canute was trying to turn back the sea, you know, when he wasn't, was he? We all know that. And I think this annoys me because it contributes to this bloody story about King Canute. You know, it's like Alfred burning the cakes, isn't it?
Can I just take
Um,
a guess here? Can I just take a guess that Sean is the only person to have ever connected like Genesis to the sort of spirit of England, like in this kind of specific historical
yeah,
sense?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think I think Get 'Em Out by Friday again. It's a little bit of a Python. I always think it's a little bit Python-esque, isn't it, with the sort of the voices in it. It's not a particularly a great song in my opinion. So there's a few. I do think for I accept your point that it's a very up and down album, but for me it's more up than down. I think it's a terrible album cover. I did quite. I've said this before. I did quite like Nursery Crime in the fact that it's quite naive and Victoriana, but I think this is just pants, basically the Foxtrot album cover, and that was his last one, wasn't it? Paul Whitehead for Genesis. But there you go. Okay, number
Yeah, you
5.
can tell why. I tell you what, you really are the shot, the soul. Sean really is the soul of this podcast, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, the sort of the proper prog dimension. But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, to me, for example, if you compare, I mean, we don't want to get hung up on this, but if you compare Close to the Edge to Supper's Ready, you know, as sort of, you know, qua sidelong albums, sidelong songs. To me, there's no comparison. Close to the Edge is much better. It's properly composed as a totality. Supper's Ready is just episodic. It just goes from one thing to another. It's like, oh, let's do this now, let's do this now. But that's not really. That's not to me. That's not really thoughtful. Composition. Get 'Em Out by
It was
Friday.
a sort of it was a sort of quasi-religious experience live, wasn't it? Anecdote, you know, the handyman at work, Mark. He won't be listening, but he was there. He went. I mean, he loves this album. You know, he drives the minibus with this blaring away in the background, and he goes, "This is proper Genesis," you know. And he did. He said, "We all, you know." it's sort of pant wetting stuff at the end when Peter Gabriel goes out on the wires and he's got the fluorescent lighting and everything. So I think it did mean something at that point. But it's funny because, as you say, like Genesis love it, don't they? They think it's their high point.
Mm.
But it's a bit like something like Sergeant Pepper, where it's slightly, would you say it's dropping out of relevance, isn't it? A bit, it's like that. You could say it's like it might have meant something in 1972, whenever it
Yeah.
came out, but it's not quite, feels like it's not their best now, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree with that. Yeah,
Mm,
yeah, that's right. I mean, I remember my uncle say, my uncle Julian. He said
mm,
that when The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway came out, it was like Sergeant Pepper. He said coming out, it coming out. It really meant like it was like, oh my God, what is this? This is amazing. But it might have felt like that at the time. But
mm.
I really don't think. Yeah, it sort of with the passage of time, I think it's not quite the same.
Oh,
Now listen, let's move on, shall we? Um, so we're not here all night. My number four is, and then there were three. Again, I make no apologies for this choice. I think this is a brilliant album. Obviously, no one else agrees with me. I just think that it's. I think sums up what I was saying earlier about. I'm more interested in like if I think the tracks are good. I'm not that bothered about the style. I mean, I remember I heard someone online saying that in one of these other channels, saying that they hated this album because Mike Rutherford wasn't as good a guitarist as Steve Hackett. It's like, is that really your criteria for whether something's listenable or not? I mean, like, fair enough, but I mean, maybe that is a criterion, but it's not. It's not my criterion.
Mm.
So I love every track on this album. With the possible exception, controversially, of the Lady Lies, which I think is a bit kind of boring. But I think that all the other tracks works, and to me, like an album with, five, what's it, just six, like 11 tracks on, all of which work in a row, to me is like a successful album. So I've got no complaints. I've listened to this over and over again, and I'll probably play it again tonight. Number four, Peter.
Number four for me is Selling England by the Pound. It's a fantastic album, isn't it? I mean, it's just a riot of writing from beginning to end. And there's only a few moments, obviously, we've discussed this in depth before, where I just feel a bit sort of thrown off the cart, where I think they just get a bit cerebral. But you can't. I mean, something an album that contains, I Know What You Like. Sorry, I Know What I Like, and The Battle of Epping Forest. I mean, they are incredible songs. I just think that. The writing at that point had reached such a pinnacle, and they sound fantastic. I think they're in a sense, for a band like that, they are battling in the studio to get that sound across. There is so much going on, and really, if an album like that came out now, imagine how great that would sound. I mean, just fantastic. I think it's a great album, but it's not my favorite album, but it is a good one.
Great, Sean.
I've got The Lamb at number four. I actually, controversially on this podcast, love The Lamb. Um, I'll start. I actually like the cover. I really, it's a hypnosis cover, and I like the inner sleeves as well. Got a slightly sort of Art Deco kind of kind of feel. I know the criticisms of it that it's all over the bloody place. You can't make head nor tail of the story. Um, some of the pieces are improvised, but they do improvise a bit. Genesis, on some of their stuff. Um, I think it's I think it's an album where I think they again it probably wasn't the happiest time, that they made it in. Obviously there was a rift going on with Gabriel. Steve Hackett had the hump and was off crushing wine glasses again. But I like Genesis when they take risks artistically, and I don't think it's like their best album by a long chalk, but I think it's an interesting album. Um, I think there's some incredible drumming on it from Phil Collins, and possibly some of my favourite. I mean, one I'd listened to as just a short track is Riding Scree. I just think his playing on it is
Mm.
absolutely sublime. But maybe, being a semi-retired drummer, this is where I zone in on. So, I like this album. I think Peter Gabriel tried to push them forwards a little bit, and I think this is where the problem came, because he did say he was trying to get them away from doing songs about fairy t- fairy tales. So he did a song about somebody, searching for his brother and losing his yellow plastic Shooby Doo, whatever that was. So yeah, it is a mad idea. It's totally crazy. You could have, I mean, it could have been made into I think, did they try and make it into a film, or Peter Gabriel
Could
There's
have
a
imagine.
those?
script, wasn't there? Yeah.
It was a script, yeah. Um, it is bonkers, but I think he was trying to, at that point, and it's corny to say, but music was changing. They were trying to chuck the bad apples off the tree. I think he was trying to push them into new territory. Whether it worked or not, I don't know. It's a controversial album. I think the live shows would have been interesting to see. It's very visual, and perhaps that's another reason that I like it. Um, but again, I think I'd rather that they took risks and failed than make Invisible Touch or Genesis Genesis. I mean, who bloody cares? I'd rather they tried and failed to make great art than didn't, in my opinion. That's where I am with Genesis, basically. But
Brilliant. Thank you, Sean. That was
thank
very interesting. Now, look, we are no, sorry, I don't mean that sarcastically. I genuinely mean that. Time's rolling on. I think that I'm slightly worried about a technical limitation, but so maybe we could try and speed up a tiny bit for the
yeah.
last three. I mean, to mix my metaphors, I was talking about the league system earlier. Um, we're getting 3-2-1 now. We're going to
Mm.
bronze, silver, and gold.
Yeah.
Although football is in the Olympics now, isn't it? So there you go. My number three, yeah, I said I'd go a bit quick. My number three is Trick of the Tail, which I think is a wonderful, wonderful album. It's not quite perfect. I'm not a big, huge fan of the last couple of tracks, but it's as near as damn. Um, why isn't it higher for me? I mean, I think that the absence of Peter Gabriel makes a difference to me. The sort of the band loses their intellectual charisma slightly for me at this point. But I think it's an amazing, amazing record. This, and I have almost no complaints about it at all. Peter, number three.
Number three for me is Abacab. I've always loved this album from the first moment I heard it. I thought it was just fantastic, and it's this great blend of sort of charisma from Phil Collins. There's some wonderful moments on it of humor, really strong writing. I think. I mean, the first side I think is just fantastic, and that continues in the second side. It falls apart slightly towards the end, but no album's perfect, I suppose. Not even the one I've chosen actually is my top one is perfect, but I love the way it sort of goes between tracks as well. Sometimes you get those little links. I really love the production of it. I think that this is a real step forward for them. I think it's probably an underrated album as well, actually. It's one that sort of gets lost somewhere between Invisible Touch maybe and the kind of end of the Gabriel thing. I've always loved this album. I think it's fantastic. So it's not my top, but it is a very good album.
Excellent. Amen. Sean,
I've
number
got
three.
Nursery Crime at number three. I've got Hogweed, Harold the Barrel, musical box. I love it. I like the cover. I know it's naive, but I think it's perfect. Um, yeah, I think that I first album with Phil Collins, and he makes an incredible impact straight away. Totally
Mm,
lifts the band. I've actually sort of think the guitar playing is very sort of aggressive on this album.
mm.
And it's quite to the fore. It's a little bit clunky. Peter's the expert on all this guitar malarkey. But I always think it's interesting, is it? Because he gets quite faded down into the mix as time goes on, doesn't he, Steve? But I like it. I think it's a fantastic album, and one I probably sat listening to in the dark, for years. Great album.
That is your main criterion, isn't it? Is it listenable
Yeah,
in the dark?
Mm.
Um,
exactly.
Brilliant. Number two for me, selling England by the pound. We've already done the analysis of this. Got one or two weak spots for me, but basically it's great, absolutely great. I think the fact that it's got a couple of slight weak spots for me is what separates it from the number one slot, which anyone who's paying attention will know what my number one is. I mean, if you've got that much sort of memory capacity, but yeah, so yeah, brilliant. Not quite number one. Peter, you're number two.
Nursery crime. I mean, if you cannot appreciate the beauty of that, the final passage of Musical Box, I've been waiting here for so long. There is something
Mm.
missing from your soul, because that is one of the greatest moments in rock music per se. I think just across the board, it is a brilliant thing, and that sells the entire album to me. I think the writing's great across the board. I love the Phil Collins sounds incredible. It's interesting isn't it, how Phil Collins gets brought up so much.
Mm.
Like where these
Mm.
there is a band around him, but it completely changes the sound of him. He sounds incredible across the whole album. I
Mhm.
love it. Even things like Absent Friends, I think it's a delightful little track.
Mm.
And it's just pipped to the post by one more album, but I absolutely love it. I would recommend it. I think it's just heartbreakingly wonderful.
Mm.
Did Mick Barnard secretly write this whole album, and we just don't know?
We could put that up for discussion in our next episode on Mick Barnard. Um, all right, brilliant. Sean, you're number two.
Number two is Trick of the Tail. I really love it. It's love the cover, absolutely love it. Um, Not that that's I shouldn't really go on an album cover, but love all the tracks on it. It's got fantastic drum sound. It's quite a heavyish sound, I think, for Phil Collins. It's a sort of I've put Bonham-esque, and I think he did like John Bonham. He did, and vice versa. I think they both fans of each other. Um, yeah, I can't fault it really. It's I like every song from beginning to end. It's brilliant.
Brilliant. Yeah, Squonk is supposed to be a tribute to Kashmir, isn't it, by Led Zeppelin? I don't see it myself, but that's what they had in mind, I think.
Yeah.
Uh, Brilliant. Okay, so my number one is Nursery Crime. You know, again, it's weird. It feels controversial because people are just, the band are always talking this album down, and not a lot of prog fans seem to rate it very much. But to me, this is the only completely perfect album in Genesis's catalogue. Even like, Selling England, Trick of the Tail, I think they're wonderful. But there's even on those, there's moments where which I'm not so sure about. But I think Nursery Crime is perfect. Everything in it works. Is programmatically perfect. I think Fountain of Salmacis was the first song. Salmacis was the first song I ever heard by Genesis, because it was the opening song to that Rock of the '70s thing, which I heard as a kid, and I just thought it was amazing. And yeah, so that has a special place in my heart, and I think that's sort of the perfect close of it. I don't know. It's just possibly my favourite rock album of all time, Nursery Crime. There you are. Peter.
Trick of the Tail. I love this album, and it's kind of almost like in the middle, isn't it, of their career? It feels like that anyway, which is although it's not at all, chronologically across the years. Um, but actually, if you take it from now, it's probably like the last album is the middle. I love this album. I mean, everything about it, and and the environment in which they wrote this is just amazing, isn't it? Who the hell would pull this out of the hat? Given the situation they were in, which is Peter Gabriel didn't even write any of this. It was just, I'm leaving, great. So that's the end of that. And then they pull this out of the bag. It's just amazing album. And, and everything has changed, doesn't it? Collins is pushed to the front. And you've suddenly got a completely different sound, but the writing is so good on this that it just flies through. And I think it's got a bit of everything as well. I can't mention the blues this time because I don't think Genesis ever did it.
Well,
Not once.
you just mentioned it, so that's
I
cool.
just I just mentioned the absence of blues. I love all this. I mean, the only bit I suppose where I kind of think, oh, this is like an attempt to write something, to sing along with, is that kind of squonk thing. I'm not sure I like that. It's like the guitar has become like the sing along part. I don't think that's a particularly good song, but I love everything else on here. Robbery, Assault and Battery. I love the opening track. Dance on a Volcano. Entangled is lovely,
Mm.
just beautiful, and the whole sound of it. The sound they managed to get for the time as well. I think so. I was talking about that earlier. The kind of recording processes. I think it's wonderful. It's my very favorite album.
Wonderful. I'm slightly worried that we're going to have to finish on the hour, but I'm not really
Mm.
sure about that. So let's just pace ourselves. Sean, you're number one.
Well, the only one left is Selling England. So it's Selling England by the pound. I think I've said everything I wanted to say on the last podcast. Just absolutely love it. Love the playing, love the sound of it, love the album cover. I can listen to all of it really without any gripes. And yeah, fantastic album. Do you quickly want to hear Steve's top five?
Yeah,
Or
Peter,
time?
could I just ask before you say that, before you read, Sean's
Yeah.
brother Steve has contributed his top 15. Sean's going to read, but Peter, have you worked out the rankings? Do you need
I
any time to
I
do that?
have, but it gets a bit confusing because some albums have got the same amount as other albums. So I've kind of put them as a joint. Anyway, I'm sure it'll all make sense. I can give the last,
Mm,
like the top five I could do.
But
mm.
do you need the any time to calculate, or are you already set?
No, if you want them all, that might be harder, but I can give you like the top
This is
five.
this is
All
like
right,
Eurovision, isn't it?
it is, yeah.
Did you want them
But
all? I mean,
slightly more exciting. If you can do all of them, that would be brilliant. If you
okay,
can roughly do them.
I'll have
Uh,
a go.
but okay, so Sean, while he's doing that,
Yep.
calculating that, do you want to just
Well,
read Steve?
shall I just read Steve's list? We've got 15 Calling All Stations, 14 Genesis to Revelation, 13 Abacab, 12 Invisible Touch. We've got 11 Genesis, 10 Duke, 9 We Can't Dance, 8, and then there were 3, 7 The Lamb, 6 Trespass. He's a big fan of Trespass, is our Steve. Number 5 is Foxtrot, 4 is Wind and Wuthering. Steve really likes Wind and Wuthering. Uh, there you go. 3 Nursery Crimes, 2 Trick, and 1 Selling England. There you
Brilliant.
go.
Well, it's glad that thanks for that,
Yeah.
Steve. I'm glad that somebody likes Wind and Wuthering, and yeah, we're almost up to the hour, but we'll see. We should be okay to run on, but who
Yeah.
knows? I mean, we're
What is it they say on? They go to the judge, don't they, on Eurovision, and they
yeah.
say we're good to go, or something like that, don't they? And it's like, oh,
Does
you know,
Peter look like a man who's good to go right now?
I'm
it's
nearly
a.
there.
I mean, their scoring system. It's like Latvia are in the lead; they've got 200 points, and then suddenly they get the scores from the jurors, and there's like 500 million points come from somewhere, don't they? From the Soviet bloc or whatever it is.
From the Balkans.
Balkans, yeah. Oh dear.
Brilliant. Well,
Okay,
yeah. So yeah,
I'm ready.
we're on the hour. I assume we won't be cut off, but Peter, if you could just uh,
Okay,
do
so
a rundown.
I will run you through it, but I'm not sure how joint things work, whether or not you go to the lower number or the higher, but I'll read them out for you. So we've got here in number 15 is From Genesis to Revelation. 14 was Calling All Stations. So this is like our amalgamated results here altogether, not just mine. And then we missed 13. We've got a joint between Genesis and Invisible Touch in at 13,
Mhm.
sorry, in at 12. Then 11th, We Can't Dance. 10th is Wind and Wuthering. Ninth, we go to Trespass. Eighth, we go to Duke. And then with Dodge 7 to get a joint sixth, and then there were 3, and The Lamb Lies Down coming together. Number 5 is Foxtrot. Number 4, Abacab. And our top 3 put together are we've got Selling England by the Pound was in 3, and then joint first is Nursery Crime and A Trick of the Tail.
Interesting.
Mm.
Right. Okay. Um, I mean, I say interesting. It's interesting to us, isn't it? But
You're
yeah.
being generous.
Well, we've hit the hour and it hasn't been cut off. The link hasn't been cut off here, so maybe we could carry on chatting for a while. No, I'm joking. Let's leave it there. Thank you so much for all of your hard work, particularly Peter Gambaccini on the doors,
Yeah.
and we'll see you shortly for another edition of Crapper. And have a good evening, everybody, or whatever.
Okay. Okay.
Ta-ra, bye.